This perspective enjoys widespread support inside of Russia, especially among the elites. The argument is that you would launch limited conventional attacks against the West.
Hmm.
And if that didn't convince the West to cease and desist from helping the Ukrainians to attack into Russia, deep into Russia, then what the Russians should do is think about using nuclear weapons. Not large numbers of nuclear weapons, but just a handful of nuclear weapons to send a very clear signal to the West that the Russians mean business. What the Russians feel they have to do here is establish deterrence. The Russians believe, and I think quite correctly, that the West thinks that they can help Ukraine attack Russia, and there'll be no price to pay for the West. The West gets a free ride here. It just can help the Ukrainians punch away at Russia. There's no real deterrent in effect against the West. And the Russians believe they have to establish a deterrent. And they want to do that with conventional weapons, or they're talking about doing it with conventional weapons. But their argument is if that doesn't work, they'll use nuclear weapons.
Wow.
The Russian perspective here is basically that the West doesn't understand that they're dealing with a nuclear armed adversary, that we live in the nuclear world, and that when you begin to threaten the Russian homeland and you begin to kill Russians in large numbers, that you are creating a situation where the Russians are going to have an incentive to strike back, and to strike back in serious ways, and to try to convince the West that we live in a world where nuclear deterrence should obtain. You in the West may have forgotten about that, but we're going to remind you that we live in a world where nuclear weapons may be used, and we will use nuclear weapons if necessary to restore deterrence. So that's what's going on here. And it's a very dangerous situation because the West and Zelensky don't seem to care about Russian red lines.
Right.
The West and the Ukrainians seem to think that they can just pound away at the Russians and get away with it.